You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io. We find ourselves in front of the Santa Isabel Theatre in the Santo Antônio neighbourhood in the center of Recife. Inaugurated in 1850, it was named in honor of Princess Isabel, daughter of the second and last emperor of Brazil, Dom Pedro II, who reigned between 1840 and 1889, when he was deposed by a coup that resulted in the proclamation of the Republic. Although patriarchal historiography doesn't pay much attention to princesses in general, Isabel Cristina Leopoldina Augusta Micaela Gabriela Rafaela Gonzaga de Braganza e Bourbon definitely entered the Brazilian history books when she signed a law abolishing slavery in the country on May 13, 1888. The Golden Law, also known as Law Number 3353, freed 720,000 men and women who were still enslaved here without any compensation for the years of exploitation or any initiative that would guarantee them a chance to integrate into society. At the time, it fell to Isabel to sign the decree because she held the position of Princess Regent of Brazil, as her father was in Portugal with very poor health. Princess Isabel is doubly honored in our vicinity at the Praça da República because to the left of the theatre is the current seat of government of Pernambuco, called the Palácio do Campo das Princesas, or the Palace of the Field of the Princesses. The building is so named because it underwent a major renovation in 1859 to receive Emperor Dom Pedro II and his family during a visit to Pernambuco, and Princesses Isabel, then a child, and her sister Leopoldina were often seen playing in the palace's gardens. It's a tad curious that the woman who, as an adult, would sign the abolition of slavery in Brazil would have played as a child in the gardens of a palace built on the ruins of another palace that was not only built but also maintained by the labor of men and women, mostly from African countries, exploited by European colonizers. We're talking about the Friburgo Palace, built between 1640 and 1642 to be the administrative headquarters of Maurice de Nassau's government during the Dutch occupation of Brazil. The Palácio do Campo das Princesas, built in the 19th century, stands on the same site as the old 17th century palace, but it is a completely different construction in neoclassical style, since there was little left standing of the Palácio Friburgo 2 centuries after the Dutch left. And even though their presence only lasted 24 years, the Dutch occupation has also always occupied space in the collective memory of the people of Recife, and even in the 21st century, misinformation and the lack of clarity on what is left standing from this period is still prevalent. The answer is, well, there is much more literary content left than material remains. Right here where we are, there are no buildings left of that period, but in a way the Dutch heritage is out there in the open for everyone to see. As Pernambuco professor and historian José Luís de Mota Menezes explains, we can recognize the work of the engineers and architects of Count Maurice de Nassau, who ruled Dutch Brazil between 1637 and 1644, from the way the streets of Recife's oldest neighborhoods were designed and built. The layout of the blocks in this neighborhood, Santo Antônio, was how the old city of Mauritius was organized, and also São José, the new Mauritius, still follows Dutch urbanist logic. At the time of Count Nassau, following on the then recent reforms of Amsterdam, the available land was divided into rectangular blocks where streets, squares, streams and moats were laid out. In the case of Old Mauritius, in the first part of Nassau's urban planning project, a central square surrounded by blocks was built, taking advantage of the existing Portuguese houses but expanding as far as the moat of Fort Ernesto. From there up to the Forte das Cinco Pontas in the territory of the new city of Mauritius, the Dutch engineers followed the same idea, laying out streets in rectangular frames, but in reduced sizes. It really seemed that the intention was to differentiate the two parts of the city by their dimensions. The old part of Mauritius had much wider, ventilated and tree-lined streets and was reserved for the authorities in the city's bourgeois class, while the new, simpler part was intended for people with lower purchasing power. It was also here in Old Mauritius that the Count of Nassau had a palace built between 1640 and 1642 for him to live in and receive his guests. The Fribourgo Palace, or Palace of the Two Towers as it was also called, was an imposing building by the river, with a crosswing, a large hall and two towers that extended perpendicularly to form a square with gardens, water mirrors, various spaces for cultural activities and stables for horse riding. It was modelled on palace buildings in Holland, which were used to entertain the nobility. According to Erik Odegaard and others, the inspiration for the Fribourgo, as well as the entire court apparatus implemented in Brazil, came from German heritage, shared by Nassau and his Nassau-Siegen family. As there was no actual Dutch court here, the palace had a botanical garden and a zoo frequented by the high-ranking officers of the West India Company, responsible for administering the colony. It's worth remembering that the palace also had a slave quarters to house the enslaved people of Nassau and the West India Company near the stables. After the expulsion of the Dutch in 1654, Nassau's palace became home to the treasury of the province of Pernambuco. By 1840 it had fallen into disrepair, and in 1841 work began on the Campo das Princessas Palace, the current seat of the Pernambuco government. A striking difference between the two buildings is that the current building was erected facing the Praça da República rather than the Capibaribe and Beberibe rivers, as was the previous palace. The direction of the building and its architectural style have changed considerably since Maurice de Nassau left Recife in 1644, but it can still be seen from the Praça da República. Since 2004, a bust of the Count, donated to Pernambuco by the German government, has been placed on the square as well, facing the new palace, like someone looking nostalgically at the old residence where he lived in luxury and wealth, not unlike Princess Isabel herself.